Hi, we're meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal people. I'd just like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal elders, past, present and emerging, and I'd like to note that sovereignty was never ceded. Now I'm here with Emma.
Hi, Emma Davidson, MLA from Murrumbidgee.
And I'm Jo Clay, I'm the member for Ginninderra.
So we are here today to have a little chat about my old friend Gary Humphries.
Do you know him, do you?
I do actually know him. So yes, in 2007, I had the bright idea to run for Senate with a women's party in the hope of trying to get some votes off Gary Humphries and towards some good things that would help women in our community, because I kind of felt like maybe he was missing the point a little bit. But I didn't aggravate him too much, because after the 2007 election, when he was returned as a senator, he still sponsored my Parliament House security pass, so I could come visit him anytime and talk about women's issues, of which he seemed to take no action. But he was always ready to listen. Unfortunately, based on his article recently about Beware the Politics of Statue Erection, I'm wondering if maybe he might need another visit so that I can explain a few things to him. And I'm wondering if you're feeling the same way.
So this is an article that was in Canberra Weekly, and we're just gonna revisit that article briefly. Do you want to start us off, Emma?
Yes, so I've been through the article with my special highlighting sexism highlighter, and I found a few issues. So I thought it might be good to go through them, Jo, and you can tell me what you think of this. So let's see. So it starts out like so. Labor and Greens women MLAs are promoting a petition to erect a statue of a prominent woman in Canberra by 2023. Too often, new statues in this city have celebrated yet another old white man, says Greens MLA Jo Clay. Oh, that's you. They argue that such a statue would be a source of inspiration for women and girls, someone they could model themselves on.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I think looking around Canberra to not notice that there's an awful lot of old white men in bronze is a pretty interesting way to open. It's also it's not really a petition to erect one statue of prominent women in Canberra. It's really more about redesigning the whole public art program so that we have a little bit more gender balance across the board.
Oh yeah, of course. We were never going to stop at just one. Yes.
So he goes on, he says, if their argument is that women are underrepresented in the category of achievement traditionally represented by statues, they are mistaken. Men predominate in this category because they have achieved more. Feelings?
I have so many feelings. I mean, if you're looking at the past, when women were not allowed to do things like, for example, keep their job after they got married, up until 1975, or participate at the same level as men in so many fields of endeavour, then of course we're going to see an underrepresentation from the past. But you know what? We're looking to the future, and if we're going to do that, we need to start looking at, well, where are the women who have been doing things like, for example, founding health services or starting movements, or women who were architects, like, say, I don't know, Marion Marnie Griffin, or artists. There's so many fields in which women have excelled, and yet they're missing in our statues.
So we continue on with that excellent line of thinking. According to Mr. Humphries, there have been relatively few women explorers, prime ministers, chief justices, and Nobel laureates. That observation reflects no discredit to women, but rather to the social and economic barriers they have historically faced in reaching positions of leadership.
Yeah, so, I was having a little think about, well, who would we want to acknowledge? Are there actually any examples I can think of? Yeah, actually there's quite a few. And they're pretty easy to find. If you just do a little Google search, so Gary, if you don't know about Google, it's a thing on the internet. You can use it to find information you don't already have in your head. I made a little list. There's quite a few women out there that we could be acknowledging that have made a significant impact on Canberra in particular. Olive Brown, she founded Woonunga Nimitija Aboriginal Health Service. Betty Churcher, former NGA director and fabulous for the arts movement. Isabel Coe, she was a founding activist at the Aboriginal Tent Embassy. Pamela Danoon, a founder of Women's Electoral Lobby, of which I have previously been the national convener, the National Foundation for Australian Women. She was a biochemist. That's a science thing, Gary. And she was a feminist. We love feminists.
It sounds like there's a few women who have achieved some things.
Oh.
Some things have been achieved by women. Is this what you're trying to tell me?
It's entirely possible that maybe there are more women out there.
So
Rosalie Gascoigne,
perhaps the
Beryl
problem-
Henderson, Helen Hughes.
Perhaps the problem is not so much that women haven't achieved anything, but maybe, just maybe, and I'm just going to float it out there. Maybe the problem is we've been setting the categories wrong. Maybe a bunch of old white men who pick categories in which old white men exceed and then put up statues to old white men is a bit self-reinforcing. Is that maybe where we're heading?
That is entirely possible. That could actually be the problem. Yes.
Interesting.
It's, what is it that we're recognising and valuing in society? Is it being a dead former Prime Minister from 100 years ago? Or is it founding some of the services and organisations that make our city what it is today? Just a thought. I mean, so look, he goes on to say that if the argument is that an act of positive discrimination is needed to inspire women, the MLAs may have a point. But there is a significant downside to this approach. When you visit the town squares and cathedrals of European cities, you see many monuments to historical figures. But what the educated visitor soon realises is that most of these figures are ones they've never heard of, and they conclude that the monuments are reflections of a personage's past power or wealth, not their contribution to humanity. So are you thinking that, old European cities are what we should be modelling ourselves on here, or is it possible that there might be other examples we could look to?
I'm tripping over the words. I can't help tripping over the words when somebody outs themselves in the language they use. So we've got a man who's talking about the educated visitor. I'm guessing that might be you, Mr. Humphries. I'm not sure if you've spoken to anybody else, but I think you might be channeling yourself a lot on your last European holiday, and I applaud that. During COVID, it's marvellous for us to all, think back nostalgically to our last trip, or maybe the 1950s, depending on where you are. That's fine. But I think perhaps looking back to the past is not really what your average state-sponsored art program and monument program should be doing, particularly in a young city like Canberra. Do you think maybe we should be trying to model for the future, maybe trying to recognise some of the things that we really like, that we could be doing better, rather than simply exclusively looking down the barrel of the past? I don't know. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that is entirely possible. And while we're talking about language, he goes on to say that in Australia, we like to think that more enlightened principles are at work today in the erection of monuments at public expense. A statue today is earned, surely, not the result of wealth or sycophancy. I mean, how many times did he say erection?
We've got 3 erections. We've got 3 erections in this very short article. I don't like to make a point of it, but I have noted it, and I'm finding it very difficult to get past a conversation exclusively about statues of women in which we have so many erections. I guess that's just how we roll.
Yeah, some of us, I guess, yes. Yeah.
Mr. Humphries says that a statue erected primarily because of a person's gender compromises that principle. Like the traveller in Europe, people will grow cynical. This woman is commemorated in bronze because she was best female Chief Justice, not best Chief Justice.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting comment to make. And, I've heard it in a few places before. The kind of places I've worked where there's not a lot of women around. And people will say things along the lines of, oh, well, you're just here to, make up the quota or things like that. And you sort of go, actually, there wasn't really a quota. It was just they were recognising that I had some skills that might have been missing from the team, and that's why I came here, and can we get on with the work now, please?
It also does beg the question of, is every statue up there recognising best white man in show? Which isn't the first thing that occurs to me, but from now on, now that idea's been planted, that's what I'll assume. So thanks, Mr. Humphries. That's actually a really good filter to put on our public art.
It's very helpful. It's very helpful. I love how helpful he's always been. Look, so he says as well that most up-and-coming women I speak to would be horrified if they were perceived to have won a position based on gender preferencing rather than their own worth. Is the position really any different when it comes to memorialising their achievements? Well, look, we're dealing with this every day anyway. Like people are, they're asking that question every day, and we're answering it quite definitively by achieving good things.
I think Mr. Humphries is onto something though, and I don't know the tactful way to put this, but if most up and coming women that you speak to are horrified when you say something, Mr. Humphries, it might be because of what you're saying to women. It's possible you're in a lot of conversations and women are trapped in them and they can't get out and they are horrified. It's true. Yes, most women you speak to probably are horrified. You're not necessarily correctly identifying the source of that horror, so maybe have a little reflect. If that's a common experience for you, stop and pause and think about what you're saying.
Now, Joe, I know you're a big fan of the arts, and he goes on in this article to then express some opinions about the arts. Can I just read this bit to you?
Yeah, please do.
Positive discrimination can backfire sometimes. For several years, the ABC classical music station has been heavily promoting female composers, claiming that the preference for old white composers undervalues the contribution to music by women. Notice he said old white composers, not old white male composers, because composers should be generally assumed to be male.
It's a given. I think it's a given.
Yeah, must be. Thus, on any given day, one will hear multiple works by women whose names are largely unfamiliar even to classical music buffs. Recently, the station sponsored the Classic 100, a poll of its listeners as to the 100 best pieces of classical music. Although over 127,000 listeners voted, just one work by a female composer made it to the list. The listener re-education program has apparently fallen on deaf ears.
I love and hate this bit the most in an article in which I love and hate quite a lot of it. I love the ABC, I adore the ABC, and they punch far above their weight. They achieve so much more than they should with their funding. But I think to assume that in a few years of ABC radio to have combated the entire human history that has exclusively celebrated white male composers is ambitious. And I applaud your ambition, Mr. Humphries, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. I also can't help but shake the image of the first female composer, who I'm guessing was some chick a few 100,000 years ago banging a couple of rocks together, and some bloke came along and grabbed the rocks and showed her how to do it better, and then called all his mates over and said, "Hey, look at this thing I just invented." We've been working against that for quite some time. So ABC, keep at it. I love your female composers program. Keep at it. But we're going to have to keep running that for a bit longer before we see the results of that particular experiment.
It's possibly also a bit of a reflection of the channel that he's choosing to listen to. I mean, I too love ABC classical music. But classical music is, as it says, classical. They're going to play a lot of stuff that was popular quite a long time ago. If you were to say switch to Triple J, on their playlist at the moment, they've got a new track by Banks, they've got Tones and I, they've got G Flip. They've had Code of Conduct last year during the campaign. They were waking me up with their breakfast commentary every morning and then playing all sorts of awesome music. Huge numbers of female artists making fantastic stuff. Because they're playing a lot of recent stuff, not just things that were written, say, 200 years ago. Just a thought, like if you want to get some more diversity into your music listening, maybe try some new channels as well. It doesn't hurt. And it's still ABC, so it's okay. We do seem to have a bit of a theme that a lot of the information we're trying to convey here is post-1950s. So maybe looking at anything... That's where we're going wrong. Post-1950s, maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've gone a bit too modern. Maybe it's too modern. Is it possible?
It's possible. So we conclude here with Australia, unlike old Europe, is a society based largely on merit. For that reason, any departures from that principle, however small, however well-intentioned, should be viewed with deepest suspicion.
I think that pretty much sums up how I'm viewing this entire piece by him, with deep suspicion. That perhaps he's actually departing from the principle of merit himself. Because if we're actually genuinely looking at merit as the reason for who we want to memorialise in bronze, then actually there are a lot of really good women out there in our community who deserve to have a statue, who the rest of us would love to be able to, walk past in a park and go, yeah, that's right, that person did that awesome thing that's contributed to Canberra being the city that it is today. So I think that's really what's going on here, is I'm just feeling deeply suspicious that this is not really reflecting how we're all feeling.
It is a little bit. It's the myth of the meritocracy, isn't it? I've always found the myth of the meritocracy a little bit circular. If you believe that fairy tale is real, then the people in power are genuinely the best human beings. And I've had some problems with that on multiple levels, which I guess is probably why you and I are here, Emma.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult logical problem to break down for Mr. Humphries. I think perhaps Google myth of meritocracy and maybe spend a couple of hours on the interwebs. Maybe that might help. I don't know.
Yeah, and try for your new music channels on your radio. And yeah, if you know, I think really what we want here is we want to change the system. So let's go.
You could also try perhaps listening to some women instead of talking to them, and you'll see that look of horror on their face might slowly relax, and you might also learn something.
You might. Good luck, Gary.